what is collaboration? Collaboration means different things to different people, but it's a process of two or more people, entities, or organizations working together to complete a task or achieve a goal. It is rooted in action. In some cases, it may be rooted in ideation, but it is about working together. And I may have shared this quick story with you, but when I first moved to the US and I was interviewing, I had to practice saying the word I in front of a mirror because I was so used to using the word we. And it's never been comfortable for me. I think in terms of we, but I was told that it was important to market myself as a leader. And in the US, leaders are defined in an I, as an individual way. We're finally seeing this being challenged a little bit more, so I can shed that skin and say, okay, I'm no longer having to conform to that. But that's a great example of how I was succumbing to an organizational harm that supports the image of a leader that I frankly don't fall into by that criteria. So as we know, the same person can be received differently by two different people. So somebody once told me they may not like you anyways, so you may as well stick to your true values as to who you are, and it could be received either way. So just a push for continuing to do this work from a place of values and remembering that we are enough. So today we are focusing on the value of collaboration. We're in our third module now. So our first module is awareness. Our second module, which is the second bar, 5 to 8, is accountability. And then our third module here is action, and it's going to culminate into a DEI strategy. I wanted to give you a very quick mini lesson before we go forward, and that's on prioritization versus productivity. So as we do this work, it's really important to embed it into our systems and not add on extra things that we want people to do, because that is when it's least likely to happen. So almost think of it as if you had space, some people refer to it as big rocks, or if you had a backpack and you could only put certain things in it, what would you put in it? And that's how I like to think of DEI work. Instead of saying, okay, do all this within your work and then do this on top, if we want to scale this work within organizations, we want to take some of the work that's already being done and make sure that it's equitable and challenge that, instead of saying, okay, do the regular work as it is and then add this on. That's when it's more likely to be abandoned, because people's most valuable resource is time. So our DEI values, our house rules, you're familiar with both of these by now. Our house questions. And Luce, you had your hand up. Was it in regards to what I just mentioned?
Yeah, it was that name that you posted, and you said that was a free download, but I couldn't find what the name was again of the download.
It's called The Language of Inclusion, and the person who shared it is James E. Wright. And for those of you that are listening and didn't hear this in the office hours, there's a great DEI practitioner who's now at Google, and he's created a free resource called The Language of Inclusion. I believe it's in its 4th iteration now, and it just defines all the words that are used in DEI. So I will share a link with it when you are in your breakout rooms so that you have that bookmarked. It's excellent. So after our last class, we didn't do a share back, but these are the pieces that I just wanted to share with you. Resources should be defined as time, money, and access, and we can ask for all 3. Number 2, review DEI programs that get results and don't get results, and always ask why. Number 3, there are things you can do and can't do without a DEI budget. So hopefully that was beneficial to you, because I am mindful of the fact that push comes to shove, some of our organizations, including if you're working for yourself, may not have that big budget that, from my lens, coming from the tech industry, does have, but that doesn't stop us from being able to do the work. Number 4, break out DEI budget by organizational priorities. I shared a budget template, and being able to put a percentage behind it gives people who may have access to the resources, yourself or others, the ability to gauge where that money is going. And finally, DEI burnout can be prevented using the good, fast, cheap model, remembering that in the middle is that circle that says we can't have all 3. So it's important to pick 1, maybe 2, but giving a clear message message by sharing this framework that we can't do all three, right? Something's got to give. Okay, so today we are going to talk about the benefits of collaboration. And the first thing I wanted to say as our icebreaker, in our last class, I asked what's one thing you've learned from each other that you haven't learned before. And in this class, I would love for you to use the chat to share one strength that you have that you'd like others to know about. And following this, I'm going to share a Google Doc that we'll fill in after this class, and we'll collect this. So no pressure to feel like you have to, write everybody's strengths down. Let's just use the chat to drop in something that you're really good at in the DEI space that others can learn about. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of really great answers here. I know some of you are also mental health professionals and that you work in different spaces. So some of you do audits, some of you perhaps are speakers or facilitators, and some of you have podcasts. So hopefully this is something that we can continue to learn from, that DEI is not just one skill. It's like groundwork for what we can implement our unique strengths on top of. These are excellent. These are some that I haven't personally come across, and as we build our community, this is something that we want to lean into. We can work together as teams and do this work more effectively. Okay, so as I think about collaboration, when I was at Amazon, a very interesting situation happened. The group that was responsible for Alexa hired Samuel L. Jackson to do a voiceover in which he was speaking in using a lot of swear words and profanity. And it wasn't received well at all. It was launched, it was taken to market, and there was a lot of feedback by Alexa users, which is the home device that some of you may have or not have, about how this portrayed Samuel L. Jackson and other Black men in a negative light. And the team, so at Amazon, we pull something called the and-on cord, which means that there's a problem here and we need to address it immediately. And they did an analysis of the team, and there was very little diversity on the team, mostly white, and within the US. And the team went back to the Black Employee Resource Group and said, what did we do wrong? And what I saw here was two problems. Number one, they didn't collaborate with Black employees in the beginning. And number two, they came to them after and said, now I need you to fix the problem. And what, unfortunately, the Black Employee Resource Group did not receive this very well. But the unfortunate part was they felt as if they didn't respond, it would just make the situation worse. So they felt like their hand was, they were put in an uncomfortable position where they didn't feel like it was right for them to respond after the fact, but they felt like if it didn't, it would create more harm for the community. So something to think about, right? We can see the value of collaboration in real life examples. And the case study I wanted to give you today, it was in the classroom chat. I don't know if you got a chance to review it, but it's about Band-Aid. Band-Aid is their most recent product, which is called Our Tone, is a launch of bandages in 3 brown shades to offer more inclusive bandage options for communities of color, and also using the profits from that to support the work and equity of Black nurses across the US. So what I would like you to do is think about that in your breakout rooms. I'm actually going to drop a poll to see how many people you'd like in your breakout rooms to do this exercise, and answer the question, how would you like to be involved in the collaboration process, right? So taking that example of Samuel L. Jackson, if you were brought into a process and we all have validity in the collaboration process, how would you personally like to be approached and engaged? So let me just drop this poll right now. It's specifically asking how many people would you like in your breakout rooms to discuss the value of collaboration?
We have it here.
you said 4 to 5. There's some people that said smaller. I think I'm going to do 4. And I was actually thinking even pairs maybe or groups of 3. But we can stick to our 4 to 5. And it's just a different conversation this time. I'm not going to ask you to come back with a best practice. It's more involving yourself and how you would like to be engaged in this process, because that can inform how we involve others in this process. So this takes us to the value of collaboration. When I was in school, I think I told you my background's in education, I learned about the difference between rote learning and meaningful learning. And it really spoke to the way a classroom was designed and how people learned. Rote learning is based on memorization, and a lot of cultures do this. And meaningful learning is more critical thinking and building upon your learnings. And when we think about this in the context of the workplace, we can see why this matters. If we're top-down hierarchical, we can see that the opinions and perspectives of people in more marginalized, underserved communities are often the ones that take a backseat or are considered not as important. So it's really important to start with why collaboration matters. We know that collaboration blocks innovation. Lack of collaboration blocks innovation. Groupthink prevents no new ideas. Also, we found that customers or clients or stakeholders notice, right? We're noticing more than ever when we have representation in leadership or within organizations throughout. And there's a great quote about, I think it's something like, not having diversity within an organization in New York is a microaggression in itself because the city is so diverse, right? So we're definitely noticing when there's lack of diversity. Other words for collaboration are co-building, co-designing, co-developing, cross-pollinating. We very often talk about the value of language, and we can use these words throughout our work to really drive and center the focus on how this isn't something that I'm building for you, we're building it together for us. Another piece is I shared in my last class the 6 signature traits of inclusive leadership or inclusive leaders, and one of them is collaboration. So there's already a lot of research out there that shows that this is valuable. And coming back to the 15 characteristics of white supremacy, one of them is binary. So by bringing in frameworks around collaboration, we're intentionally breaking that binary and saying there's different ways to involve people, which we'll get into. And this is how we're going to do it, and this is why it matters. So before I go further, some of you may have been part of the office hours. I started this draft. It's an Excel spreadsheet in Google Docs, and it's intended for us to put this into practice. I'm continuously impressed with all of you and the skill sets and perspectives that you bring. So if you're comfortable, please feel free to fill in whatever information you'd like. This is a shareable document specifically for our class, and we can lean into this and say, okay, if we choose to collaborate on projects going forward, perhaps opportunities, this is a shared document that we can work off of. So please bookmark that and fill it in your own time, and then we'll continue to revisit it as we go.
It says view only right now. Okay, yeah, you have to change it to edit.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I opened it up to everybody. So let me make a note of that when you're in your breakout rooms, reshare it, and then I'll make sure that all of you have access to it. Thank you for letting me know about that. Okay, so here we go. This is what collaboration is. I have a wonderful colleague by the name of Dr. Sandra Upton, and she says that according to John Kotter, 70% of change management efforts fail, right? And of the 30% that succeed, it's based on collaboration. And the way to do this is to make sure that underserved groups, and by that we're defining that by those that make up less than 15% of the employee base, are overrepresented in the planning process, right? So you have idea, and then you have the best idea in the center. But that doesn't mean just getting anybody in there. We want to be intentional about who we're involving in this process. And of course, this has to happen in the context of psychological safety. So we can't just say, hey, Black Employee Resource Group, what went wrong with Samuel L. Jackson? We want to build those relationships earlier, and we want to continue to build them after a project, policy, practice is done. It's not a hard start and a hard stop, right? So I'm gonna share some in real life practices as to how to involve people in a collaborative process that I've seen work in the workplace. Number one, allow people to share their ideas anonymously, right? We can circulate forms, polls. We've seen it in this class. People are more likely to participate when they have the option to not necessarily put their names or identities next to it. Close the communication loop. When you ask people for their input, you want to follow up, right? It could just be a thank you. These are the next steps. This is what you're going to see next. And another great idea is reward people. So that could be through gift cards, it could be through incentives, it could be through any number of different examples. But generally speaking, studies have shown that people are more likely to collaborate when they're rewarded for their collaboration. A couple other things is remembering that communication is nonverbal. 80% nonverbal, sorry. So always remembering to pay attention to people's shrugs, if they have their camera off, and what that means in terms of whether they're fully participating in the conversation and how we can draw them in a more creative way. One of the best examples of collaboration that I've seen is, the Pride flag that came out in 2001 is definitely more of an intersectional representation. We've definitely seen in Black History Month more Pan-African initiatives of recognizing that Black is a term that is global. We're not necessarily talking about people only in the US. So by bringing people into the conversation earlier, we can share what comes out of it in a more inclusive and holistic way. I always begin when I'm doing anything in terms of sharing policies and practices with some sort of a case. Some people refer to it as a business case, but this is a great example of putting 5 examples of why we want collaboration. Asana is a wonderful resource. They offer a lot of images like this, so it's not just text, it's really punchy images of what people can relate to so that they can be drawn into the conversation, right? So these are the benefits of collaboration. This is another thing that I would definitely recommend to larger organizations. What we've found is that generally speaking, when organizations grow, when they go virtual, and when they're more diverse, collaboration is reduced. There's different reasons for this, but chalk it up to the complexity of a team. There's a great Harvard Business Review article on this. It's called 8 Ways to Build Collaborative Teams. I didn't want to overwhelm you, so I'm not going to drop it in here right now, but it is in the resources. But one thing they said that can circumvent this is having collaboration as a core value. So here we have Instana, an organization, and I love it because it's 5 fingers of a hand, but the first one is collaboration. So instead of arguing the case for collaboration on a project-to-project basis, you're building it into a foundational value. If you are beginning your DEI journey, this is an excellent time to drop in collaboration as one of those 5 pieces. You could also refer to it as community, co-development, cross-pollination, whatever you want to call it. It generally refers to a value of not leaning into one person's way of doing things, but being very intentional across different levels and different identities within the organization. So here is my colleague. DEI is all about changing behaviors and systems, and collaboration is key. You will very likely hear a lot of DEI practitioners speak about the value of collaboration. We hold community very high as a value, and we believe that it's not just something that we do because we value community, but because it leads to actual change within an organization. Okay, so principles of collaboration. So there's 12 here. This is an article that was shared by Forbes. from the Chess Media Group. And the person who wrote the article said that collaboration reminds them of playing chess. You really have to think ahead. You have to be intentional, because if you don't, the chances are that you're going to fall back into the dominant way of doing things, the organizational norms that are based on biases within society. So we have to be very intentional about creating principles of collaboration. The more likely you are to make it a foundational value or to write down different principles, the more likely people are to stick to it. This is extensive, so don't feel like you'd have to do something like this. The ones that really stand out to me are number 4, which is get out of the way, or learn to get out of the way. And what that refers to is not policing how this work is done, not policing what collaboration means. And a great example I gave in the last class or two was about how the Indigenous Employee Resource Group that I worked with at Amazon did not have a leader. They didn't believe in having a single leader. They believed in more of a collaborative approach. And so if there was a policy around that or an enforcement around that, it would take away the organic collaborative method that employee resource group had established. So that's one. Another one that sticks out, and basically the 4 that stick out to me are 4 to 8. So number 5 is leading by example. When our top level leaders show vulnerability themselves and model collaboration, people are more likely to take on that practice themselves. Another vote of confidence for leadership coaching. When we invest our budgets in leadership coaching, leaders learn how to demonstrate these values. It starts impacting the organizational culture, and we start seeing a shift in how this work is done. Number 6, integrate into the workflow. So again, we talked about not adding on additional work, right? People's most valuable resource is their time. So how do we fit collaboration in naturally? We can make it a core value. We can make sure that we don't have passwords involved. I mean, an example is just what I did right now. I shared with you this amazing Google Doc, and you can't even get in. So that's an example of what I mean. But we can also build collaboration into our retreats, into our offsites, into our virtual meetings, right? There's so many different ways that we can do this, but it doesn't have to be something you do on the offsite. It's just built into our culture. Number 7, create a supportive environment. Reward teamwork, right? For a really long time, we've seen talent management systems designed to reward individual achievements. For example, if you, in some organizations, if you recommend somebody else, you're rewarded for it as an individual. But how can we shift that and work with HR and say, how do we reward team accomplishments? Like, what can we do? Money is an excellent incentive. We've seen this. And we've also learned that in times when we're pressed, for example, recession, when we're really, really crunched for time, money, resources, collaboration goes out the window. So we want to make sure that we're constantly creating incentives for people to reward. It could be an excellence award, it could be, or an excellence rewards, or something that acknowledges people in front of an organization, perhaps gives them a bonus, a PTO. We've talked about this as a wider group. There's a number of examples here. And then finally, measuring what matters, right? When we measure collaboration, we can measure what we call busy metrics. So busy metrics are things like comments that people make on a thread. Or we can measure engagement metrics, which, for example, could be how connected people feel. And those are the ones that really give us a better evaluation of what collaboration looks like within an organization. Okay, so this is a piece that was shared by Kumar Rakesh Ranjan. There's the link at the bottom. But it speaks to how co-creation, and there's a couple organizations that have done this. For example, Facebook enables customers to create content for other users. Procter and Gamble. There's a number. But what they did is they found that a lot of organizations lean into one, so your co-production values, or the other, the values in use. So they either lean into people's knowledge, equity, interaction, or they lean into people's experience, personalization, and relationship. And his suggestion is the best organizations lean into all of these, and that the best way to do this is, and I'll get to that, it's like a flow chart as to how to involve people in collaboration. But before I go there, this is a great quote: "No one can whistle a symphony, it takes a whole orchestra to play." And why it's important to think of us not just as an individual, but as a group. If you've ever been on a safari, then one of the things they say is that animals are less likely to attack because they see the Jeep that you're in as one, even though there's a number of different people in it. So that's another great way to look at it. So if you're proposing how to be collaborative within an organization, I think a lot of times we talk either be collaborative or don't be collaborative. I would again suggest using frameworks that break that binary and sharing something like this. There's a number of different ones on the internet, but I really like this one because it speaks to how we're all on a scale of collaboration. Some of us may be in benign neglect, cooperation, and some of us may be in proactive collaboration. And I wanted to speak to that one in particular because proactive collaboration is the one where you're asking questions like, what is upcoming for us? How do we want to think about this work? How can we involve communities that haven't been involved before? How can we plan and deploy our resources and spend less time in firefighting mode, right? Let's get ahead of it. Why are we waiting until the very last minute to collaborate? Again, coming back to that Samuel L. Jackson example, how can we get ahead by creating a proactive model of collaboration where we bring people in as valued stakeholders? And one really important point that Carlos Valdez de Pena makes is that collaboration can be used destructively too, right? If you think about the power dynamics within an organization, if we talk about collaboration, it can lead to underhanded politics, right? So people can say, oh yeah, we met on the side, people who don't have options for accessibility weren't able to join us, but the decision was made with the people that we invited. So we want to be mindful of taking into consideration that collaboration is only useful when we're doing it through an equitable lens. We're not meant to collaborate over destructive means or through underhanded political means. It's designed to center DEI and equity in the middle. And yes, thank you so much, Sadia. Collaboration has always been there. Gatekeeping is the problem. And that's what I mean by the destructive piece, that collaboration is not really collaboration unless, coming back to Dr. Sandra Upton's point, we are intentionally bringing in the groups that are underrepresented. And the quote, that's right, the statistics that she gives is 15% are those that make up less. In other words, underserved should be overrepresented. Planning process. So when we have that critical statistic next to it, then we can guard against gatekeeping. So let me just drop in this poll. It was asking you about where you find yourself functioning in these different areas. So a range, but you can generally see DEI practitioners value collaboration, and what we need to do is have frameworks like this that show leaders and those with access and resources where we are as an organization and how we can get better. So we can say, hey, I've identified us as here. We want to get to proactive collaboration. This is why. These are the resources we need, and these are going to be the inputs and outputs that we're going to measure. All right, so last slide before we go into our breakout rooms. And this is how we see collaboration as a flowchart. I love this because in the middle is the circle, right? So we have the planning, and then in the middle we have co-creation. And what they say is this is the multiple rounds of iteration. And if you feel as if you're doing something and you haven't involved somebody, there's still an opportunity to involve them. Again, progress over perfection. And we want to co-create, test, measure, and learn. We want to learn, co-create, test, measure, and just continue that. And then we want to scale. And when we show this holistic image to those with access, they begin to see how the co-creation collaboration piece is critical to this middle circle. Without it, there's a gap, right? And you can do what happened with the case of the team at Alexa who launched this product and they scaled, but they were missing co-creation. So when you go back with lessons like that, and feel free to use that example, I think it's a really powerful one. You can see why leaders will now say, we never want to make that mistake again, and we want to make sure that we involve communities from the beginning. So one of our classmates, Andre, I reached out to Andre on LinkedIn, we're connected, and I asked for this quote specifically. I'd heard it, I had heard him say this, but I really appreciated it, and it was, we can't expect to be experts in every aspect of DEI. This will eventually lead to burnout. It is better to collaborate with those who can provide the expertise. Andre, thank you for this. I think this resonates with a lot of us. When we think about collaboration, we're not intended to be experts on everything. That's actually very harmful to those that are experts or have the lived experience. What we want to do is create the space for people to share their own experiences in a way that inform our workplace policies and practices. We want to involve them earlier, and we want to involve them later, and we want to continue iterating that cycle to make sure that they're not left out, and nothing goes to scale until we make sure that we are being as inclusive as possible to everybody who's underserved, so that we create something that can go to market or nonprofits, whatever which case we're talking about, without it being a gap in representation. So this brings us to our exercise. I heard last week, there is a lot that we're going through, and that's why I just want this session for you to think about what Band-Aid did. I love this example. I think I mentioned to you, my 7-year-old has vitiligo, which is a skin disorder where your melanin is gone on your skin. And so he has different colored skin. And it's always resonated with me because it's something that, is welcome into the industry. We've seen similar products that are doing that. In my opinion, it's a little too late. Like, we could have done this earlier, but it is a good example of, how the organization has worked with different partners. And so one of them is the Hero Collective, which is an external organization to find ways to bring this to market. And what I would like you to do, so there's the link in case you want to look to that, but I would like you in your groups to just kind of think about that in the back of your head. And then in your groups of 4 to 5, share which identities inform your perspectives. And then the question that I'd asked before, how would you personally like to be involved in the collaboration process? And while you're doing this, I'm going to make sure that I open up that Google Doc so that you can all add in your expertise, and we can go from there. But before we go any further, Dr. Fry, did you have a question?
Yeah, can you go back to that slide about Band-Aids? Because Band-Aids literally stole this from grounded this, been doing it for like 5 or 6 years. So I think to kind of center that aspect that Band-Aid actually put this from a small Black-owned business was the other way around. So they're actually late to the party in doing this. If you know, June 2020, it's right after George Floyd is when they started doing it.
Sorry, Dr. Fry, you were cutting off a little bit, but you were saying that that Band-Aid.
So Band-Aid stole this from Groundage, who I put the link in the chat. So it's a Black-owned business that actually has been doing this for like 5 or 6 years. I bought it years ago when they were just online. So they actually Band-Aid took it from them, not the other way around. And Band-Aid started this after George Floyd, whereas this other Black-owned company has done it for years before them.
Thank you for sharing. That is something I did not know of. This is very critical information that as we talk about this, so thank you so much, Dr. Fry. I definitely need to look into this and read about this more. You're absolutely right. This came to market in 2020, and even in the link that I share, they say it's in response to, I don't remember if they use George Floyd's name, but they did say in response to racial reckoning, and I did not know that this was taken from another organization. So this is a really important piece. In looking at Band-Aid, are they really being collaborative if it was taken from an organization that had already done this previously? In that case, they may be pulling from an idea that's not collaborative at all. They're extracting. And so that's something that we definitely want to keep in mind. And I appreciate you sharing this, because this is something I definitely need to read up more about, and perhaps you all would like to read about that more too. So I'm going to definitely add that into the Google Classroom chat, and thank you, Dr. Fry, for sharing that. Okay, so these are your groups. We don't necessarily need to come back and share in real life, so take your time for this. If you would like to share, we will have those 10 minutes at the end, but I want to walk you through the assignment as well, and then any Q&A that you have. So I'm going to give you about 12 minutes, maybe 15 if you think you need more, and then we can come back. And again, for those of you that want to come back to the main chat, that's available for you. So let me do the breakout rooms. Here you go. Hi, Dominique and Tony. How are you?
Hi, Dia. I'm not really sure how the returning to the main room works, but I just explained to those in my breakout room I'm not feeling the best this evening, so I just figured I'd save the little bit of voice I have and come back to the main space.
Yeah, absolutely. And feel free to keep yourself on mute. I'm sorry you're not feeling well. We are going to come back at 6:25, so even if you just want to go get a glass of water and take care of yourself, that's completely understandable. Thank you for letting me know. Kristen, and sorry, Tony, let me start with you. How are you? Okay, and Kristen, I see you here too. If you want to go over anything, we can definitely do that. Otherwise, if you just want to stay here until everybody rejoins us, that's fine as well.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
I'm still just trugging along. I
don't have my camera on because it says my internet connection is unstable. So I'm just trying to save as much as I can. I also wanted to tell you, I perked up a lot when you mentioned Dr. Sandra Upton. That's actually my cousin.
Oh my gosh, you're kidding.
Her mom and my dad are brother and sister.
Oh my gosh, you're kidding. I mean, we're working together on a project as we speak, so we are working very closely together. She's wonderful.
Yeah, she said you're awesome too. I texted her like, I'm sitting in a class with Dia, and she just like referenced and quoted you, and she's like, that's so awesome. She's like, I just talked to her this morning.
Yeah, I just reached out to her and said, I'm doing this class, and I love to share the work of fellow DEI practitioners, and you always speak about change management, and I would love to mention you. And she said, yeah. So she sent me something this morning, and that's incredible. Yeah, it's a small world. She's so wonderful. You've been following her journey then of moving into consulting. She's excellent.
Yes, I actually we are transitioning. Our executive director is retiring, and we are transitioning into getting a new executive director, and we're also just transitioning in leadership. And our board actually just rejected our anti-racism framework, and so I'm actually wanting to bring I'm going to call her Dr. Upton in this. Bring Dr. Upton to our organization. Like, I'm going to bring her name up to see if maybe there's some things that can be done to rectify and help us on our DEI journey.
Yeah, she's wonderful, and her website, and she has so much experience. So that would be great if you could get her. People need that lens and that expertise, and I hope you and her get a chance to collaborate on work too, seeing as you're both in this space.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny. I never even she's like my big cousin. She used to do my hair when I was little, so I always still just see her in that light.
Are you in Michigan too then?
Yes.
Yeah.
Both in Grand Rapids.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I know I'll see her one day really soon. I might even go out there. So, you and I should definitely stay connected. And what a wonderful family you have. It seems like a lot of, commitment to this work. And so,
yes.
I can imagine your reaction when I mentioned her name, because
my eyes got so big.
Dr. Sandra Upton. So, yeah.
I know her. I'm like, there can't be that many in the world.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Have you let her know that you're in this class? She must have heard from you today, because it's hard to make these connections sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I literally texted her when you said it, and then I took a screenshot of the
that's so funny.
slide and sent it to her. So, yes. And I also follow you on Twitter. So, but my handle is a little different, but I was the one who responded to you to say my mom also has vitiligo.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's a little tough on people with darker skin, because you can see the contrast, and I definitely know in my culture there's a stigma, so I try to bring it up as often as I can to say that not everybody has the same uniform skin tone. I have a great friend and colleague, Josiane Picard. Josiane Foubert. She has a wonderful business called Picha, and she creates stock imagery of Afrocentric stock imagery, and her story is incredible. That she's from Gabon, Africa, and she said that when people think of Africa, they think either poverty or safaris. Mm-hmm. And she wanted to create an image, stock images of Black people globally that look different, right? Different skin textures, different hair textures, and she has people with vitiligo there as well. people with lighter skin and darker skin, and it just shows the range, because she says so often we see that same look, and it doesn't speak to the diversity within, cultures, within, the cultures that we see and that we're familiar with. So yeah, she's a wonderful person too that I would definitely follow, and I'm so glad that we're connected, because there's
Yes.
a lot of chatter that happens on Twitter.
There is. That's so awesome. Like that, it's my mom got it. It developed in her 20s, so she's had it all of my life. But I know it's been super hard for her, and even like now seeing models that have vitiligo and things like that, it's still like super hard for my mom. She wears a lot of makeup and she covers a lot of her skin, and so it's super hard for her to just embrace it wholeheartedly. But I am glad that the culture is shifting and just being more accepting.
Yeah, this is why representation matters, and why it's so meaningful to have people from different communities in spaces that normalize a lot of this. And we're only beginning to see that now. I think we need to see a lot more of it. But for those of us that see it, as long as it's accompanied with the right policies and practices, I think it's a very, very powerful way to move forward from a place where everybody had one look. Or, there's studies even on leaders where they say that if you're a particular height, if you're a particular skin color, if you have a particular name. I think there was a campaign that came out a couple years ago in the UK that said there were more men named John in the Fortune 500 company, like the CEOs, than there were people who were black and brown throughout the whole. So it just speaks to the over-representation of some groups. So when we finally begin to see that representation, that not every leader looks this way, not every person who's black looks this way, not every person that's brown looks this way, not every person with a disability has the same disability, then we're beginning to finally introduce the human range of diversity that is so important to how our society works and functions. So thank you so much for sharing, and tell your mom that she is, she's a little 7-year-old boy who shares the condition, and we're changing the narrative together. And yeah, stories behind that. So
yes, thank you.
Guadalupe, how are you?
I'm good.
We're gonna come back as a wider group in like 3-4 minutes. But if you wanted to share anything here, it's open. Otherwise, just feel free to get a glass of water or whatever, you can just take a stretch as well. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a productive conversation. I actually wish I was in all these rooms, because I would love to hear how you would like to be brought into the collaborative process. One thing that is sitting with me is what Jillery, thank you, wrote in the chat, and that's how gatekeeping is the biggest problem here. Majority of people are committed to collaboration, but what do we do when gatekeeping occurs? And this is something that a lot of us have painfully experienced, that we can do everything right, and yet when those gatekeepers are in place and there is not a system of accountability, then we continue to be held back as people, as communities, as all kinds of things. And I want us to continue to think in terms of accountability. What does that look like to not only reward good behavior, but to weed out bad behavior? And one quick example could be, instead of giving bonuses or financial incentives to leaders, what if we gave them a mark on their promotional reviews if they don't do it? So do they need to be further incentivized, or do they need to be punished when they don't do it? There's another great quote that says, nothing will make a good employee leave faster than watching watching you tolerate a bad employee. So let me quickly go through the assignment and then I'll open it up to Q&A. This assignment is optional, and I'm going to ask you to design a co-creation cycle. So as you notice, a lot of the work that I've shared over the past couple classes, or all the classes, is a cycle. It's not a line, right? And the idea is like you go like this, and you have a feedback loop. And looking at these 4 stages, so you have brainstorm, strategy, execution, and feedback. How do you want to ensure? So elaborate on one action that needs to take place. And then how do we ensure that the process is as inclusive as possible? And the purpose is to learn why it's important to work across different teams and identities. And yeah, if you have something that you want to add in there about gatekeeping, I would love to gather those ideas. I think this is something that we need to hear from a number of people about, is how do we make sure that we consider that gatekeeping is a major part of when we have all these cycles and frameworks and everything in place. It is likely single-handedly the biggest barrier to making sure things go in the way that we hope that they go. So this is due on the 27th. The updated time is there. And that takes us to Q&A. Luce, I do see your hand up.
It was in line with the gatekeeper's idea. And going back to Dr. Nate's comment that he had previous class, before class, where he talked about the organization that he works in, where you have that collectiveness thinking mentality, and let's say I would think differently than his religious, that the group that he was talking about. How do you bring DE&I when they have a specific mindset? So I thought that was an interesting question, especially when it comes to gatekeepers. I tried to give a presentation once, and there was a gatekeeper who immediately knocked down the idea because she didn't think it would look good for the organization. In reality, she didn't want to be blamed if someone was upset with the information I was presenting. So how do you go around those certain gatekeepers?
The one thing to note is that very often when we refer to gatekeepers, we refer to it as one person, but it's actually a number of people that are involved. There's the gatekeeper themselves, and then there's the people that willingly turn an eye to what's happening, those that continue to promote. And so it's a system of people. And when we think of it that way, the one action I think that can prevent gatekeeping is another system, right? We can't fight a system with an individual. And I think this is where an external DEI auditor is really valuable. I think that an ombudsman line is really valuable, but anything that functions outside of the organization and has some financial and promotional practices that can hurt people that engage in these behaviors. So things like moving teams will just move that toxicity, right? Or if the reporting is done through HR, then perhaps HR is working in favor of the business. So the 2 things I would recommend is 3 is understanding that there's a number of people likely involved in this. Number 2, advocating for a budget for an external auditor or somebody who can come in. And please do read about what Amazon is doing right now. It is not perfect by any means. I wrote about it on Twitter, but they are bringing in an attorney general to do a racial audit on hourly wage workers. I don't think it's complete until they do an audit on all workers. However, having an external person will hopefully lead to more policies and practices than if it were an internal person, and then actually dinging the bad behavior as opposed to rewarding the good behavior. Yes, ombudsman line refers to, it's almost like an ethics line. It's anonymous. It's where people can call in and share their grievances without it going through HR. Farah?
Hi, Dia. Hi, everyone. I was hoping that we could talk a little bit more. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on what you said at the start of class regarding not creating new work and tasks for people. Today I had the first DEI council meeting in a really long time, and these are with friends and colleagues whom I've worked with for the last 18 months to 2 years. New DEI office, and we really wanted to re-energize everyone, come back together, and mobilize and get organized. But what I quickly realized was that everyone was really burnt out, and because there's a DEI office now, they're kind of like, they want to be more advisors and give us feedback and not so much be involved in the tactical execution or activation of our DEI strategy. So my question is, that's the context, I guess. So my question is, how do we do what you had suggested, which is instead of creating new tasks for individuals, engage others to add to their already full plates, what it feels like in learning and development, in marketing, communications, what have you.
Yeah. Resources, right? So we need headcount to do this work. I think a lot of people are attracted to DEI as a concept. They think it's great, but when it really comes down to it, there's a lot of actual work that goes into creating policies and practices. And so when we propose it, we collectively need to shift away from calling this volunteer work or passion work or something that we're doing because we believe in it. Of course we believe in it, but you can believe in something and also have the head count for it. And I always advocate for this. Ask for double, because the chances are you'll get exactly what you need, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. But I've seen this industry depleted in terms of what it needs to be able to do the work it needs to do. With every incentive or initiative that we have, we need people doing it. And there's a lot of invisible work too that people may not know about. It could be creating surveys. It could be, just making sure that there's a reward incentive in place. The work is endless. And so I would really frame it as, use an example of a different space within the organization that does get a lot of resources and model your DEI budget after that. So generally speaking, within organizations, we have certain areas or departments that are revenue generators, and I'm just speaking from the perspective of a profitable company versus a non-profitable. So you have revenue generators, and then you have, I don't know what the opposite term is, but model your DEI proposal or your DEI budget after a revenue generator. This is not an industry or a space that is supposed to, it's not a cost, it's an investment. So if we frame it that way, then we're more likely to get it. I was just a personal example. I was just on a call today, and we are working on a project, and we proposed a budget, and they came back and they said, oh, we only have a budget of this much, and they slashed, I don't know what percent. But I came back and I said, listen, I said, we have two options here. Either the work, we don't do the work that you need to do within this cost, or we up the cost and then you get the value out of it. But you can't have both, good, fast, cheap, right? And with the right people on the call, they were saying, oh yeah, we'll find another way to get the budget. I said, of course you will, because if you frame it like that and what comes out of it, then people are more likely to be responsive to. There will always be that person that will say no, but there are also a lot of people that say yes, and those are the people that we want to pitch to.
What's the language that you use to get them to see that?
Investment, sustainable, core leadership competency. I love putting in that quote that I shared with you on the last slide that came from Bank of America, that lack of diversity in the US is costing, I think it was something $1 trillion, right? When you put it in terms of numbers, their ears perk up. When you give examples of what organizations have put to it, they listen. Some people say you have to speak the language of the people that have the resources. There is counter arguments to that, right? Master's tools will never dismantle a master's home. But if we want to get the resources, we can get the resources and then use that to shift the organizational culture by doing things like DEI audits, which point to the gaps within the organization and then what needs to happen to shift that. So that's the language that I use. Luckily, I think I mentioned to you, my personal mentor has always framed DEI work as an opportunity and not a cost. And I think it's just something it's embedded in my language. I really believe that it's an opportunity to do things differently. Somebody else told me once that people get behind winners. So when they see you talking about it yourself from a place of belief, when you yourself believe what comes out of it, it comes out, right? You can hear it in how people speak to it. Sorry, I didn't realize. Yes, Audrey Lord. Any other questions? Tracy.
Idea. I don't have a question, but I shared this on the last call when we did our last assignment. There was someone in the group saying, how do you try to convince your business or your corporation to include why DE&I is important? And several years ago, I was applying for a DE&I position, and this was when I didn't know half of the stuff that I knew then. But I was trying to give them an example of why it was important. So I actually used the DC Marvel Comics as an example. They were the first to have Wonder Woman was produced and led by a woman. It was the first all-led woman action series, right? And I was showing the revenue that was generated in that movie alone. I can't remember the stats, but it was staggering. Then I also used Wakanda as an example of, again, you don't know what you're missing out on until you know what you're missing out on, right? And so I used those examples and the budgets and what it did globally and nationally. And that really hit them. You know what I'm saying? To see how you don't even know what you're missing out on until you see what you're missing out on. So I just put that out there a lot of times when people are trying to find the value of what DE&I, why to bring DE&I to the table. But I think that absolutely is a great example that you can use across the board to show that kind of value.
Oh, absolutely, Tracy. The way that you just framed it is exactly what I'm talking about. It's you believe it yourself. You can hear it in your voice, and you're saying, "Look, it's not just me. There's such an interest here that you're missing out on. You don't know what you don't know." And when you frame it like that, people say, "Oh, what else am I missing out on?" And luckily we're in a time now where there's a little bit more interest, but with that, we're also seeing a lot more performative allyship. And that's why if you look at the syllabus for this class, the one thing they asked me is, what is this class not about? And I said, branding. And by that, I'm not trying to take a hit on branding. I said, I don't want DEI to be seen as a marketing or a brand. I want to talk about the principles behind it and the programs and policies. So we are definitely seeing more of an interest. I still feel as if the majority of interest is unfortunately framed in dollars, where people see it as an opportunity, and with that comes exploitation. Band-Aid is a classic example of that. Thank you, Dr. Fry, for that example. But when we have those dollars, we can perhaps do more with it. We cannot minimize the importance of what we can do with money. This is not meant to be just a feel-good industry. We need the resources, and with that will come the work and the change to our organizations. Farah? Okay, I don't know if
I was muted the whole time. I was going to say thank you to Tracy for the example, and I'll keep it really short and say, if anyone else works for an organization where the majority of the employee population is made up of sales professionals, I would really love to connect with you. I think that in a sales organization, we face a lot of unique challenges for DEI, especially when it's an industry where you are rewarded for being biased, in a sense, and in an industry where you are paid to be judgmental and your clients are judgmental and racist. And so I would love to talk to anyone who works within a sales organization that might be encountering similar challenges that I think I'm going to be up against as I go down this journey.
Yeah, and maybe what we can do is that document that I created is now open, so maybe that's also space. I can add another column there that says industry, because as I've heard some of you speak, Dr. Nate, as an example, that the industry that we work in makes a difference too. It's not just the work that we're doing, it's what is the culture of the industry. So there's the organizational culture, then there's the industry culture, and all of this plays a role in how others with access approach this work. So thank you for sharing. And yes, that is not an easy industry to be in. So if anybody has that background, I think that would be great to share. Jillery, Chantel, and then Kathleen.
I guess you just triggered the tension that I live through regularly, because I think while it might be more heightened in the corporate world or in the private sector, even in the public sector, even in the not-for-profit sector, I think often DEI investments, as good as they are done to signal something about who they want to be, but not who they actually are, or even really want to meaningfully be. And so I often find myself in a place where I'm thinking, am I just contributing to a show, or is this for real? And sometimes it is for real, but I just, perhaps it's a word of caution or a conversation to be had amongst us who are engaged in this work about how to navigate that situation, how to take advantage of a situation where people are willing to put resources towards DEI work, but that what happens in the case where, as we were talking about collaboration, you only get collaboration to help create a product that at the end of the day is going to make money for a company who understands that we're in a moment where diversity has currency, but won't do anything to actually change the structures that exist within the organization and for the employees that are marginalized or come from equity deserving groups within the organization. And so it's this kind of tension and dichotomy that I'm always working through. Like, how do we work under capitalism, understanding that capitalism at its core is about requires people to be disenfranchised, while we're asking for them to have some mercy on some of us who have never been included in that framework to begin with.
Jillery, you put into words what I think so many of us struggle with on a day-to-day basis when we talk about burnout. It's not just the amount of work, it's the work itself, right? How do we do the work when we're the work itself? That is the hardest part about this. I just quickly wanted to pause for those of you that need to step off, because of other things happening. Please do so. We're going to leave this room open for a few more minutes. I do want to hear from Kathleen as well. And Jillery, one thing that I've personally done is I've made the commitment not to do DEI work for free anymore, because I think it's actually harmful to other communities when I do that. And I'm struggling with that because I've taken on a few projects for way less than I should. I think that is giving the message that someone out there will do this work for less than what it's worth. And I've just been advised by others from underserved populations, please do not do that. It hurts us all. If people want the work, they need to pay for it through resources, not at the cost of the burnout and mental health of ourselves and our families. Yes, we have value, but please, treat us the way you would treat others, even more so. I love the quote, we're here to thrive, not just survive, right? And I feel like right now as an industry, we're surviving, not even, but we're not thriving. And it's not because of us. So we need to take back what we're deserving of and say, yes, if you want us, this is what we need for this to work, and double your ask. So, Kathleen?
Yes, hi. The example in sales, because I was a retail manager, just made me think of my past environment. It was so traumatizing, the experience I had when I brought something to light. And it was the first time I really experienced toxic positivity, where because physically there was diversity on a level, and they
had policies of diversity. You could see on their website and everything these great policies of diversity that they thought they were awesome, and they thought the way that they handled my situation was amazing. But yet the HR person knew the lingo. He knew. He said he acknowledges that he's a white male with privilege and all this. So he knew the lingo, but the way it was handled was it was really damaging to me. And I just wanted to put that toxic positivity thing out there because to me, it's harder to work with that than anything else. If everyone thinks they're all good, you can't really do anything there.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing, Kathleen, and I'm sorry that, you have faced this as well as others. There's a lot of resources out there about what toxic positivity looks like. I align it with performative allyship where, there's a destructive way to do this as well, and that's when we're not centering the underserved communities that we should be. And so sometimes sharing that as an image with leaders, although I will preface that by saying that goes on the assumption that people don't know what they're doing, when very often they do, and it's very intentional. So save your time, your bandwidth, and be selective on what you will and won't participate in. And of course, I say this from a place of privilege because not everybody has that choice. Some of us are voluntold what to do. But yes, I do hope that as a community we can hold space for each other when we do face these moments of trauma. Dr. Fry?
Yeah, the one thing I was going to say, Dia, was to kind of talk about what you're saying is not only, don't accept free stuff for people you need to pay. I'll do for class and stuff like that. But there are things where I'm like, if you can't pay, I'm not doing it. And second, don't give any suggestions on people who do the work for free. Because I think that's how we perpetuate it, right? Is we're like, okay, I won't do it for free. But here are a few people. And all we're doing is causing them to keep overworking people for free. I had this situation where this conference was like, we can't pay you and we can't pay for your travel. So I'm like, man, you expect me to, I'm losing $4,000 out for you not paying me to speak. And I got paid for my flight, my hotel, my car, my food for a group of 100 that probably aren't going to hire me because you want me to do something for DEI for cheap. No. And he was like, well, any way you suggest? Absolutely not. I don't care if you don't hire me. You need to pay whoever it is because what you're doing is just harmful as hell. And that's where we tend to see is people are like, well, you're gatekeeping. You are stopping other people getting education. Well, I'm not doing that. What I'm doing is stopping this older white man from thinking that he can hire black and brown people for free and have them pay everything to come work on the potential for exposure. I'm not trying to be exposed to COVID. I'm not trying to be exposed to the sun. Definitely not trying to be exposed to what you think you're giving me for free. And so also that aspect, when people try and get us to give them for free, don't do that either because that perpetuates the harm of thinking that other people will do it.
Yeah, Dr. Fry, thank you. That is absolutely true. Often when people are looking for somebody, they'll reach out to you first. And then when you say no, they will say, well, who else can you offer in your place? What you can do, I think, is if you are approached for something and you can't fulfill it, if you're approached for a paid opportunity, you can't do it, do use that opportunity to recommend somebody. And that is your opportunity to say, I'm happy to recommend somebody for a cost, right? And it's very interesting from perhaps mine, Dr. Fry's, and a lot of other people's perspective. Some people go silent, and that's when you know that they weren't serious about the work because they don't ask us to do marketing or branding or PR for free. Why should DEI work be done for free or at a cost lower than what it deserves? I want to just thank you all for your time. I'm just being mindful of, I'm sure you have other things going on, but I will find a thread that I came across as to what you should be paid for DEI work in terms of speaking. I haven't found one in terms of consulting, and it obviously varies from industry to industry, but it was so well circulated among people to say these are the suggested rates. And I've shared this with people that have reached out to me and they said, oh, here's, a couple dollars here and there. I said, actually, this is the market rate. So the more we share that and somebody else has published it or it's been circulated virally, I think the more powerful that can be. So
But I also say give your price. Like I will tell you up front, I charge $10,000 a day. But with this PhD, the price you had pre-PhD ain't the price I'm gonna pay post-PhD, which is gonna be about 12 to 15,000. So also know, baby, you above market with your expertise. Charge above market with that price. Don't be afraid to add on extra zeros.
Absolutely. Yep. And that comes back to the argument, you know, double, 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 and not even double, just like, what are you worth? And community can help inform you of that. So I am going to wish you all a good evening. Luce, if you just want to stay on, me and you, I know you had a question. I didn't get a chance to answer it, but thank you, everybody. I'm going to save the chat and go through it. And I wish you all a good evening, good rest, and we will see you on Thursday. Take care, everybody.